This meeting is being recorded.
What is going on, guys? Colin Austin here for another podcast, Blacklisted Voice. We are talking about intensity today. Austin, thanks for coming on.
Yep. No, it's good to be back.
For sure. How are you feeling about all these changes in CrossFit?
I haven't had as much time to actually read through. Someone brought them up yesterday, and it's just I don't know. I feel like obviously everything needs to evolve eventually, but the last say 5 years, every year seems to be something.
Yeah,
there's no consistency, and especially as an athlete, you have these years or you have these preps or plans, and it's if you're always changing, you're always adapting to just new things versus progressively just seeing how you're getting better yourself in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the sport is chaos, and the establishment, I guess, is run very chaotically as well.
Yeah,
it's a trickle down effect.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I thought this was coming for a super long time. They back in 2018 when they said hey, we're not doing regionals anymore, and we're just going to do I think it was sanctionals at the time.
Yep.
And then they stopped doing that and basically brought regionals back with semifinals, but made the semifinals pay them money, and then they had to go and rent out these venues. So you're this doesn't seem like a sustainable business plan, but
no,
let's see where it goes. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I haven't read fully through who's run. I guess it's CrossFit that's running the two semifinals now, or all the
so.
Okay, so it'll be interesting
to see to an East and West Coast, which apparently then I guess there's no Granite Games because we're
right
West, which was nice for me because we're a half hour from there, so it's an easy venture to get to Granite Games. But now it's what are we going to do next year for semifinals?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, is Granite Games even going to be a thing anymore?
I don't know, unless Granite Games goes back to how it used to be 10 years ago when it was just a bigger competition, but its own independent.
10 years ago, it's 3
or 3. But I mean, when it started off, it was more because it got some bigger names in there as 5 years ago. But I know 10 years ago, it was all just community.
Yeah.
And everything like that. I know they incorporated a community stage this year, so maybe they'll continue doing things like that. So Granite Games can still be a thing, even though it's not a semifinal, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, maybe they could rent out those. I mean, I think if any of them, that is the one that can continue going at its current venue. They could just rent out a bunch of, I mean, they rented out the top space already, and they rented out the practice dome, and then they rented out the field, and then they had the community space. So you could, in theory, get 3 stages going there and have some pretty significant people, amount of people competing, and bring back your cash cow, which is the online qualifier where you literally make all of your money. So
well, they could even be, I mean, it kind of sucks for the timing of Granite Games because it's right around the time, obviously, because it was a semifinal. But athletes competing in the semifinal, but if you do something how Wodapalooza or all these other bigger name comps, maybe you change and you do it so you can attract some bigger names and other things like that, to where you still have a qualifier to get in and whatnot.
Yeah, and I would imagine they're probably going to change it back up to their old timing of the year, in the qualifiers, in the summertime, and then they're competing in, God, was it September, October timeframe, I think.
The fall.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I'm honestly hoping that the sport moves away from CrossFit as a governing body and starts to allow some of these other places that have been running competitions for a while now to kind of take the reins, because I think they're a little bit more involved in what the athletes are wanting to do.
Yeah, you just see how some of the competitions are run too. You got your Rogue Invitational, Wodapalooza, and all these other ones. that are like,
Rogues.
even like as a spectator, just watching, like they're good events to even just watch.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But well, cool. Yeah, let's dive into it a little bit more here. We're chatting about intensity today, guys, and this is kind of a topic that we wanted to talk on, because things are kind of starting to get to the point where it's very volume driven in the sport now, and we're starting to see a lot of bubble athletes kind of like trying to train through a lot of these qualifiers, which is inherently blunting their central nervous system, and or they're blunting their central nervous system during training, which isn't allowing them to reach the intensity levels that they're going to be experiencing inside of qualifying competitions or qualifiers. And so it's just kind of like fucking their world up. They're like, what? Their bodies are like, what is all this lactate? What is all this? Why am I breathing so heavy? Like, I've never experienced these heart rates before.
Yeah.
And so we're going to kind of talk about the importance of intensity and kind of how fast you should be looking to move, how fast, and what are some of your kind of training ideas in regards to intensity. So, Alex, you want to kick it off with just kind of like a little bit more about why intensity is so important in the sport?
Well, intensity within the sport too. I mean, you're being scored on anything you're doing in the sport.
Mhm.
You're never just doing something to do it. It's whether it's a weight, a time, rounds, reps, what have you. So you need to have like the proper level of intensity to get the best possible outcome. And when it's saying like proper level, you mean your intensity level varies in each workout. Like your like marathon row, you want to keep a relatively low intensity so you can last the whole time and sustain that for your 3 hours. Versus you have a 5-minute workout where your intensity is going to be through the roof and you need to move as fast as you can to be able to get the best possible outcome. So like those are two like contrasting things, but it's all appropriate to whatever the testing is. Because you don't know the
Yeah.
test. Every test too, if like the competition, everything is like done well, you're not going to have 5-10 minute workouts. You're going to have some shorter, you're going to have some middle, and you're going to have at least one long. And then so everything needs to be like applicable to whatever you are testing on. And that even goes with just like movements, because there's an infinite number of movements that we can test in a workout. So it's also like, well, how fast do I need to go on this, or slow, or what have you? And with the different pairings of things, like if I go too fast on this is going to affect me for this. And so like there's a lot of like, I don't know, like how I just explained, it's very like vague, but knowing that like there is different types of intensities or movements and everything else that you need to like apply to training.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of nuance in this topic, in regards kind of like to what you were just saying. Like, there is specific intensities that you need to move at if you want to be at a competitive level for like a thruster, let's say. But at the same time, if that thruster is paired with a lot of other movements inside of a workout, that intensity level for that thruster is going to need to vary based on kind of how good you are at the thruster, the time domain of the workout, and the movements that it's also paired with.
Correct.
And I think a lot of that, to your point, gets down to like making sure that you are pacing workouts correctly so that you do elicit the best score possible. Which is like, I think that's definitely something we want to kind of dive into as well here, in a little bit. But I think kind of going into why intensity is so important inside of the sport is, to your point, everything's being measured, right? And like, in order to compete at the level that you want to compete at, you have to maximize your score, which is getting into very psychologically and physiologically demanding places that we need to be able to push our bodies to go. Especially if you're kind of like that bubble athlete range, you're going to need to be used to lactate levels, high heart rates, high respiration rates. And if you're not used to those things in training, when you do have to go to elicit at a competition or whatever, your body's just not going to be ready to shuttle lactate or work under a high heart rate for a thruster, like knocking out sets of 10 thrusters at 90% of your max heart rate, or being able to close out a workout even though your respiration rates are, absolutely out of control. And it's kind of like this adaptation process that we need to experience in our training in order to be used to it for the actual competition and thing that we're trying to qualify for.
Yes.
And so that's kind of like, I guess that in my mind, that's kind of like why intensity is so important in the sport, is making sure that we have experienced what we're going to experience when we're going into our competition or going into our qualifier workouts.
Yeah. And then, yeah, when thinking about that with like training, I know we kind of talked a little bit before. So like if you have a qualifier workout and from the last time you competed, whether that was last year's like semifinals, the games, whatever, and like for the last 8 months or however long it's been, you've just been training. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you go to test yourself again. And the first time you actually go to like reach those levels is in that qualifier. I mean, yeah, you can do well, but you can't expect to do the best that you can do
Yeah.
if you haven't approached that intensity level in however long it's been. So it's building into, and then within your normal training, maybe you're having these weeks where it's like a testing week to where you are, hey, my training itself, like whether you have your strength portions, your like skill work or whatever the case is, like maybe I'm not going to be doing that this week, but I'm going to be having like 4 days in a row where I'm having like 1 or 2 like measurable metcons like a day, and I'm just going for it. And that way, you don't have to worry about like, oh, later on in the day, I have heavier back squats that I got to make sure I'm prepped for, or this or that. So like literally within your 10-minute AMRAP or your 3 rounds for time or whatever the case is, like you're just sending it. And you don't know how that feels until you do it. So that way, when you get to a qualifier, you can anticipate, or your body's already like adapt to performing under that like stress.
Yeah. And one thing I've like, kind of talking about that, one thing I've been trying to do with my programs is, so if we take the kind of basic structure of like 3 weeks on, 1 week off as kind of like a deload, and then you kind of go into the next phase of that cycle. I'm kind of writing like 2-week progressions based off of, what I'm trying to get out of their training. So whether that be like a volume response, a density response, something like that. So it's usually like 2 weeks of that first kind of like phase based off of what we're working on. And then I'm going into that 3rd week and kind of like incorporating that into more sports specific work. And then we'll kind of go into that deload. So that 3rd week is where I want my athletes starting to touch some of their intensity and really kind of get after taking what we were doing in those 2 weeks and then applying it to the sport and kind of learning that new pacing structure that you've now adapted to slightly. This works a little bit better for higher level athletes because they just tend to adapt to things a little bit easier. So this might look like 3 weeks of work, 1 deload, 2 weeks of work, and then kind of that transition-ish phase for somebody who's like a little bit more bubble or a slower adapting athlete. But that kind of like allows you to feel out that sport a little bit more and then really just send it for a week. So we might get like 2 weeks of a volume progression, full send for a week. Then you get to kind of taper and deload a little bit, let the body recover. And then we're going in that next phase of whatever that might be. Maybe we're starting to work, or maybe we're continuing to up the volume or continuing to work on the density of that, whatever that cycle is trying to elicit.
Yeah. No, and then within that too, like you have your how you're talking about like volume and building into like those intensity weeks, like it doesn't have to be like within the volume weeks, like your intensity level still can be rising throughout those weeks too, to where it's not just like, oh, I have 2 like building weeks where your thought is just building versus like getting after it. No, you can still like get after it on those weeks. So you're still like progressively like loading up your like volume intensity versus just volume training. And then in that final week, or maybe it's that like 7th week, because you do the 3 on, 1 off, 3 on. And then maybe that 7th week, like for everything you've done for the last 6, then you test. But your intensity level should still be like increasing as well, or your intensity like domain in what you're doing versus just, oh, these are all building, so my mindset is building. No, I still need to get after these, but then it's like you still have that week or that test where it's like, now I really gotta go. And that's where you can kind of get into some of that like psychological demand, like you had talked about at the beginning, where you can almost like detrain yourself during some of those building weeks because you're like, oh, I'm just going into building. I'm just training versus like, no, this is leading to a bigger outcome. So I still need to like get after these training sessions too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And some, it kind of is, to your point, one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it, where you just start to like really deteriorate, and there is like this mental component or psychological component to it where it's like, man, I need to just like, it's like a fight, like you're just trying to like literally get in a fight with your workout.
Yeah.
If you don't experience that often and develop that mentality and then use it often, it's a lot easier when you get to that like gross, disgusting part of the workout to just quit. And so like if your mentality is like, hey, I can take it a little bit easy on, you know, these 3 intervals or these 4 intervals or 5 intervals because we're just in a building phase. Like, I mean, you can do that, but you're also not sharpening your psychological tools for when we take those rests away or out of that interval where you're like, yo, it's fucking go time. Like I need to send it on this disgusting part of the workout, or when this workout gets really, really hard.
Yeah.
And so I think that is like a super important point, is like, just because you're in this building phase, like doesn't mean that it's, hey, back off and like train at a lesser percentage or lesser RPE. Like you're still training hard as shit. We're
Yeah.
just trying to make sure that we're pushing your limits so that when we do get you into like kind of taking that rest away from those intervals, that your body is able to push through whatever previous barriers it had.
Yeah. And that's within like pushing through some of those like barriers, like your rest time, if you're doing intervals, and I'm just going to relate it back to that, like shouldn't be seen as like, oh yeah, no, I should be like fully recovering. If I'm not fully recovered, that looks like I got to move like slower. Because I know that there's like sometimes I've had those conversations where it's like, no, your rest intervals are giving you enough time to like almost just regather your thought, but you're not recovered. And so like you should be getting progressively like more fatigued, more stressed out for these intervals, because if you go from 5 sets of 2 on, 2 off, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we take the stress away, and then it's like, hey, now you have 5 rounds, 4 time. You're not going to get that like time to recover, because you're not going to be able to recover until you're done with whatever objective is that you need to do. So it's like, no, I should be getting tired and fatigued. I shouldn't feel refreshed. Just because I have rest doesn't mean that means I'm fully recovered.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
Yeah,
there
for
is times that I would want an athlete to be fully recovered. Don't get me wrong, but right now with talking about intensity, it's like everything's relative to whatever that end goal is.
Yeah. And like kind of diving into like you had mentioned this before we started the podcast, but like diving into like when do we want somebody recovered, when do we not want somebody fully recovered, and like there's kind of like 2 ends of the spectrum when we're getting into training and into like competing, and there's the endurance side of the spectrum, and then there's like the sprint all out side of the spectrum. And like typically the closer you are to that sprint side of the spectrum, the higher the intensity levels are going. But with CrossFit, we also need to be able to have high contraction volumes because the sport calls for a lot of volume over the course of a weekend. Typically, even if you're in a qualifier, like some qualifiers might have 3 workouts that they release over the course of 4-day period, or like Wadapalooza is releasing 10 workouts in 10 days for the teams. Granted, some of those are like individuals, but you're still retesting. You're still doing a bunch of workouts inside of the day. So you still need to kind of have that contraction volume in order to continue to elicit intensity inside of your workouts. And so like you'd kind of mentioned, there's those two spectrums and those two sides that you want to train. And like, you know, we might want to be like, hey, you need to get more powerful, and you need to be like starting these workouts out way harder. And like your first round needs to be significantly faster. Like I know you're like a negative split athlete, but right now you're blunting your ability levels by starting out too slow because you want to negative split those workouts. Like if we can drive your power output up, then all of a sudden naturally you negative split workouts, you're going to be cutting off, 30, 45 seconds on a lot of your CrossFit workouts because you're just coming out faster. And so like that would be an instance where I would give an athlete something like 15 cal echo bike, 15 thrusters, 15 burpee box jump overs, rest 12 minutes for 3 sets. And I want you fucking going as hard as you possibly can on this. And we're going to teach you to now just get out and go out hot on these things.
And then, with that too, it's like, that's where you're talking about like giving somebody the ability to like fully recover, because if they're worried about like, oh, I got a 12-minute rest. Okay, that's enough time that I can really kind of like sell my soul a little bit, versus I only have 30 seconds between this. I am not doing that.
Yeah.
So, and that's where like your training demands or like your plan has to be in accordance for like what you need as well. To where, oh, maybe I'm not the athlete that has a negative split. Maybe my first round's always hot, but then I'm slowing down significantly as I'm going on. But then I need to learn how to like build up just a bigger like capacity in things. So like maybe instead of like you have your cal bike and burpees and everything like you just had mentioned, then say I could stick to that same rep scheme of like the 15, 15, 15. But instead of like recovering all the way, well then I have like I only have a 2-minute break, but I'm not looking at dropping off of time. So I want you to push on that first 15, 15, 15, but you're going to have 4 more sets on this. And I need you to stay within a 5-second window on all of these. So you need to be able to like repeat versus I'm good for 1 round. And then everything after that is just, well, I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah. Which I feel is where a lot of people kind of fall into, is that just like send it and then see what happens. And this kind of brings it back to that point of like, there is a pacing structure that you want to have to elicit the maximum amount of intensity in your training. So like maybe you can give an example like inside of a workout, but to caveat off of that interval where like somebody comes out hot and then they're just like decreasing time as they go. Well, that's actually like blunting your intensity, because now you're just getting like super good at suffering. You're not getting good at holding a 2-minute round pace for that workout where your body is getting used to what working at a high heart rate, shuttling lactate, continuing to contract at that speed that's needed for that 2-minute round. Instead, now you're like, hey, I went 130 and now I'm going 330. Well, your body already knows how to operate at a 330 pace.
You've proven that 330 is your jam, but we need to get to 130.
Yeah. But you're so fucked up from that first interval that your body doesn't have the aerobic system to clear all that lactate, and now you're losing the adaptations you're going to get and kind of that central nervous system almost like rhythm of moving at that pace of those 130s. And now we've kind of like almost screwed the training session, because you like, cool, you sent it, but then you had low quality of work relative to what we're trying to elicit from this from these intervals in your last 3 intervals out of 5. So like that's that's 60% of your work was pretty much garbage, and you could argue that the first round of work was garbage as well.
Well, and with that too, how are you talking about like central nervous system and everything as you're going through like your workout itself? Like if I have, say your 5 rounds on everything, and it's fast, intensity's high, like you don't have time to necessarily like think through like, oh, I need to go slower here, or I need to go
Mhm.
faster here, because as soon as you get caught in that kind of like mid-game like training on or switching, transitioning and like what your focus is, well, then you already have the workout lost. You inherently need to like, oh, this is my fast intensity pace. This is how I move. I'm not thinking about it. I just do it.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, this is a 30-minute workout. This is my 30-minute pace, and you just
Mhm.
do it. So
Mhm.
like if throughout those intervals of your training sessions, you need to be able to like adapt, not just like physically, but like almost in that mental component of like, hey, this is how I move at this pace. I need to be able to do this subconsciously. Like I am moving fast, and as soon as I stop to think, you almost lost already.
Yeah. And so that's actually something that we kind of have been putting on it. The camps have been doing recently is like teaching people how to move at different paces. And so you can actually kind of use some tests to do this. And what we've been doing is like we've been giving people a max effort test or max unbroken, something like that. It's like, okay, so here's one end of the spectrum is you have what your absolute fastest capacity is on something, let's say like 60 seconds of burpees, right? So
Yep.
like you do 25 burpees in 60 seconds, you know that is your, like, if when you get done with that, you can correlate a feeling of like, oh shit, I was lying on the ground for like 4 minutes after I did 25 burpees in 60 seconds. Like,
Yep.
okay, well, you have 25 burpees in a workout, or let's say 50 burpees in a workout. Probably not a great idea to come out and do 25 burpees in 60 seconds. To make it easier, we'll just say 20. It's I think that's three seconds of burpee. Probably
Yep.
not a great idea to come out and do 3 seconds of burpee when your top capacity is 3 seconds of burpee. And so you can kind of trickle that down now of, hey, I have 50 burpees. Well, 3 seconds is my top end speed. I'm going to slow this down to about 4.5 to 5 seconds of burpee. And I shouldn't be too taxed coming off of that to do more work.
Yep.
And so now you kind of have an idea of like, okay, here's my absolute fastest pace, my moderate pace, my kind of forever pace on certain movements. And you can kind of game plan and set up strategies a little bit better to maximize your score, thus your intensity on specific movements inside of workouts.
Yeah, and I think that when you correlate, like when you were talking about like the burpee pacing and like timing on everything, I think
Mhm.
an easy way to go about it, and just thinking from like a different sport, because I know a lot of
Mhm.
like time domains and stuff, like if you're a runner, like, and if you're gonna go out and run, like you don't want to be actively thinking or like you're checking your watch, like, oh, I need to go a little faster here, or I need to go a little slower here. Like, then that's
Mhm.
distracting from the actual act of running, where you want to keep like heart rate moderate. You want to focus on your stride length and like impact and everything else. Like, you should be able to go out and like, I'm going to run at my 7-minute pace today. And
Mhm.
you just naturally start off and you're running at your 7-minute pace. You
Yeah.
already know how that feels. So like you're
Yeah.
not having to like guess and check throughout that run, or oh, I have a 800-meter run today. I know I'm running significantly faster than that 7-minute pace, so I'm just going, and you just know
Mhm.
what it is versus like having to like recheck or retest. So like
Mhm.
you should know what your 3-second burpee pace is because you did your test. You should
Mhm.
know, hey, this is what a 5-second burpee feels like. So I'm
Mhm.
not like looking at a clock and be like, okay, now I can get back up because it's been 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, uh, to be fair, like you may need to look at a clock the first
Yep,
time
like right
you're
away,
like,
yes.
yeah, doing some of this stuff, but like eventually it should become second nature. Like, yeah, when I was running cross country in high school specifically, and then I ran a little bit more in the Marine Corps, but man, it is so weird how in tune you get with like time. Like you're like, I know that I'm gonna finish this 400-meter interval in a minute 45 based off of how I'm moving. And then sure as shit, you're like within a second or two every single time. You don't even have to look at your watch. You're just like, yep, 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 yep. It
Yep.
is like it's a weird feeling it's a weird concept to kind of like grasp if you haven't done it before, but like everyone that's done any running knows exactly what that what that's like. And I think because CrossFitters for some reason just fucking hate running, or not a lot of them run prior to CrossFit, but
Mhm.
it is so valuable. This is a tangent, I guess, sorry. It is so valuable for the sport just in regards to like one, learning how to race, like you're pulling apart all of this complexity of CrossFit when you go to a running race, and you're literally like, hey, I am solely racing people doing something that doesn't take any thought to do for me, because I've done it. It's one movement and I've done it repetitively for 8 months now, or a year, whatever. And
Mhm.
so you develop this crazy ability to just um, understand racing tactics and mindset, and like fucking with people and like coming out too hot and stuff. And then you also develop this like crazy understanding for how your body's feeling during during your training sessions and during your races, and you get like this way better understanding of your body, because you can have data that correlates to like, okay, I ran some 23800s and that one felt like shit, and oh, I was 252. Like I can
Yep.
correlate a feeling to that now a little bit easier. And I
Correct.
think,
And even
oh,
just
sorry,
with
go ahead.
running in general, this is like tangent too, but like, yeah, a lot of people, whenever we have running days, like even programming stuff for the gym here, it's, oh, we got to run. And it's like, well, if you're running for 2 minutes in a row, think of how many like actions or like strides or repetition, because you can equate like each stride to rep that you're having in that minute time frame.
Mhm.
And like even just there's a lot of impact in the sport, whether you're jumping, you're running, you're doing double unders, you're burpee, you're whatever it is. And running really gets you like accustomed or building up a tolerance to just impact over time. So like
Mhm.
I think running is great. If I could choose one thing besides like your normal like, oh, I'm a biker, I'm a rower, I'm a swimmer, I'm this or that, like if I could have somebody who's a runner, I'm like, yeah, let's do this.
Sweet. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, okay, so kind of to give you guys some metrics for like kind of how fast you're gonna need to move, and maybe like, and this would be something that you guys could like incorporate into your training, like, hey, this is a goal of mine that I want to, do burpees at this speed because I see them doing them at the games this speed. Or hey, this is the we're going to use burpees and thrusters as an example, but this is the floor that I need to have for my thrusters, because this is the floor at the CrossFit games for thrusters. But you can kind of incorporate some of that into your intervals, into your training, into your et cetera. It gives you guys a little bit more data to think about when you're going to approach a training session that you guys are supposed to be bringing it on. But I think these two are pretty solid examples, because very they're very capacity based movements in the sport, a thruster and a burpee. And I personally use them. I'm a little bit more biased to them. I personally use them a ton in my training to develop capacity. But we can take the workout 22.2 with the 100 deadlifts and the bar facing burpees. Justin Madernos and Saxon, or one of the Panchek brothers,
Mhm.
did that workout with him, and their burpee speed was it basically equated out to 2.3 seconds a rep. That is with transitions. Now the transitions weren't very aggressive on that workout. But it was basically every 2.3 seconds they were doing a burpee in that workout. So it might have been a little bit faster if you take out those transitions, but that's kind of like, that is the top of the top. They're doing 100 burpees at 2.3 seconds of burpee. So like that is kind of like your ceiling for burpees right now. So you can kind of equate that down, or trickle effect that down. If you're competing at RX competition, you're probably closer to 3.5 seconds of burpee. If you're competing intermediate, you're probably 4.5. And if you're competing like scaled, you're anywhere from like probably 5 to 8 seconds of burpee. Obviously that gap gets a little bit bigger as you kind of trickle down into different competition levels. But those are kind of some numbers for you guys to think about, and like how fast these guys are moving inside of their workouts. And then, so we took Jackie Pro for a thruster example, 95, 65 pound thrusters. So this is kind of like the ceiling of the floor, I'll say. So I used Laura Horvath as an example. She got to her bar and picked up her barbell. This is after coming off a 1K row at a pretty aggressive pace for these guys at the end of a weekend. So this is why we're kind of talking about the floor for them. So she grabbed her barbell at 342 and she finished her thrusters at 603. So that is 2 minutes and 21 seconds. So a total of 141 seconds. So that equates to one thruster every 2.82 seconds. So what you have to keep in mind with that is she also had 5 transitions during that time period.
Yep.
And she was fatigued from an entire weekend of the games and coming off of a row. So ceiling wise, this is probably realistically closer to her doing thrusters at 1.5 seconds a rep, maybe even closer to 1 second a rep. The guys were basically the exact same. They were 2.8 seconds a rep. And we can kind of equate that out to the same thing. It's probably closer to 1.5 seconds a rep for their thrusters. And so it's a pretty fast turnover speed. And now that is, again, over the course of 50 reps inside of a roughly 2 minute and 20 second window. So, but these are kind of like the rep speeds or speeds of contraction that you guys are going to be wanting to get used to. Your time domains might be a little bit different than theirs because they do have crazy aerobic systems, but
Yes.
this is kind of how fast you're going to be wanting to try and work on moving for the sport.
Yeah. And then two, it's to say like, oh, maybe I'm not at that like 2 seconds a rep speed right now. So it's like,
Yeah.
every workout I got to try to be at that 2 seconds a rep speed, because eventually at that point it's like that's not sustainable for you. So if you're right now at 3 seconds a rep, well, let me try to like a linear progression easy. I'm going to go to 2.9, 2.8, 2.7, and you just need to build up into getting to that point where you know where you should be at. Not that every workout you're going to try to do that, because eventually you're going to turn into like the guy who did 1:30 on his first round, and then he did.
Yeah. So when I say that, guys, again, there's that kind of that trickle down effect, right? Of the thruster speed, right? So like, they're at 2.8 seconds per rep over the course of 2 minutes, or you're taking one rep every 2.8 seconds. But there's kind of a trickle down effect to that, like a semi-athlete or an athlete who's competing at semis might be like, 3 to 3.2. RX level athlete might be 3.3 to 3.5 seconds. Intermediate might be 4 to 4.5. And then scaled is probably closer to like 5 seconds a rep. That's a little fat or slow, but there's that's kind of using it as an example of a trickle down. So what we want to do is like figure out kind of where our level is at, and then like what level we're competing at, and then we're going to work on training up to the next level. So if you're intermediate, maybe we're running intervals at 3 seconds a thruster rep or something like that for 10 reps, and then you're going to rest for 45 seconds, and then you're going to repeat that, and then you're going to rest for 45 seconds, and then you're going to repeat that, and you're going to rest for 45 seconds. You get 5 sets of that. And then next week, you're going to drop that rest period down to 30 seconds. So now you have, and inside of that, you're giving yourself a goal time. So if you're 3.5 seconds, or let's say keep it easy, you're 3 seconds a rep. Your goal is to finish those 10 thrusters in 30 seconds. And so what you're doing now is you're giving yourself, hey, I'm moving at a certain speed, I'm accumulating volume at that speed, and I'm getting a little bit of rest at that speed so that I can keep that speed of contraction up. And then what we can do is we can start to whittle that rest down. And now we blended it into a little bit more of a sport format where you're moving at that speed for basically 50 reps straight. Maybe there's 10 seconds rest in there or something, but that is a lot closer to what you're going to be doing in the actual sport. And it's gotten you better at the sport versus, hey, I'm just going to do a set of 5, drop the bar, walk around for a drink of water, and then come back. So now we've kind of trained that intensity level at that specific pace we're trying to hold.
Yeah, but even with that 10-second rest, like maybe you have them do the 50, but you actually set up the course the same way to where it's like, oh, well, I drop the bar, I go forward 10 feet, pick it up again, do my next one. In that transition of moving the 10 feet, that's your rest. And maybe you're like, hey, your max transition time is 10 seconds. So if they feel good, maybe they go to 4 seconds in that transition. But if they need that full 10, then they take the full 10, but they're still getting used to like the sport layout as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So a lot of creativity you can get into with that one. So what other thoughts you got here?
I know something we kind of talked about earlier too. When thinking about like intensity, it doesn't mean that it's got to be like through the roof every time. Because I think one of the very important things is like if you know you have like a limiter, well, just use like ring muscle ups, for example. And we can do like in the team quarterfinal workout, there's like the thruster, chest to bar, heavier thruster, finish with ring muscle ups, and you like rotate it through. Like if you know like your ring muscle ups are a problem to where you're not going to be able to finish however many reps you had to finish to continue on, then like maybe I had to slow down in the other parts, and that way I can be smoother on the ring muscle ups to where I keep my intensity level. Maybe my intensity is at like 80% across the entire thing versus like, oh, I'm going to go really hot on the other ones, so I'm at like 90 or 100, but then I'm starting to fail ring muscle ups and taking rest periods, and now my intensity dropped down to like 30. So like your average score in that workout, now you're looking at maybe like 60% versus being at an 80 for a better score line. So if you have like an inhibitor movement, move slower or pace or structure your workouts that are differently where you can maximize your score versus just trying to like go hard. Because if you get a better score, your intensity level is inherently higher because you accomplished more reps or you did it in a faster time domain. I think that's very important as well.
Intensity can mean slowing down.
Yes. To create a higher intensity outcome.
Yeah. For sure. There's definitely like a pacing component that comes along with those with equating intensity into the sport. And that kind of goes back to like talking about, knowing your paces too. And then that involves it for every single movement as well, as you kind of have to know what your paces are. Like I can do 1 rep every 30 seconds on a bar muscle up or something like that. And a lot of that comes down to making sure that you're kind of testing some of these things quite frequently. So you have an idea, which comes down to kind of what you were saying before too, Austin, about like making sure you're getting testing weeks in.
Yes. And then that way, when you get to your qualifiers or actual competitions, you're prepared versus just, well, I did a lot of training. Let's see where I'm at.
Yeah. Yep. Allows you to set up some better pacing structures. So
correct.
Yeah, well, cool. I think that's everything for me. You got anything else or?
No, I think we hit on everything that we kind of wanted to talk about, and we got into a little tangent with the running, but I think that actually correlates well into intensity. And I think that it's an easier thing to think about for some people.
For sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If you guys can please like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, that would be great if you guys are watching. If you're listening on whatever podcast streaming service you are listening on, please follow us on Instagram, blacklisted.hq. And we will catch you guys next time. Thanks for coming on, Austin.
Yep. Anytime.